This is a response to two videos by PaulMcKeever, which attempt to answer the questions, what is art and what is good art? PaulMcKeever is a objectivist, Ayn Rand apologist, who I generally agree with, and the videos are actually a response to Luke 12,000, who is somebody I've followed for a while and I find him very interesting. And I'll preface this by acknowledging that I realize I'm a little late to the game on these videos. They're a few years old, but nonetheless, I just wanted to throw in my 2 cents. So, Paul, first, you attempt to answer the question, what is art? By rejecting the premise that an object's state of being art, or what I'll call artness, is subjective, and therefore you reject that anything or everything is or can be art subjectively. That is, that you imply that art must be an objective subset of things in the real world. You compare this to the definition of an apple, and whether if one also called a banana an apple, and then expanded the word apple to mean any number of things, the definition of the word apple will lose its meaning and therefore become meaningless. However, you fail to define the word art as you understand it. For the sake of clarity, I'll use the definition of art as the quality, production, expression, or realm according to aesthetic principles of what is beautiful, appealing, or of more than ordinary significance. The fallacy with your argument is that while an apple contains a certain minimal set of physical qualities that give it appleness, such as its shape, its texture, its color, artness is instead a fully subjective condition where this subset of qualities is dependent upon the viewer, and it may not fall between the lines of what is generally accepted as art. So one person may perceive a plastic bag caught in a tree as the most beautiful thing they've ever seen, and while others may find that odd, they're wrong to imply that the person is somehow incorrect for perceiving the state of the object or objects as art. Now, in attempting to answer the question of what is good art, you juxtapose subjectivism versus objectivism, and you also throw in intrinsicism, but I will omit that for now. You then go into a diatribe about the correlation between metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, politics, and art. But the actual question of what is good art is never actually answered. You then state that subjectivism is entirely wrong after stating that subjectivism implies that nobody's art can be judged to be good or evil, which implies that art should be judged on the criteria of good or evil. Now, in an attempt to answer this question for you, I will again invoke your apple metaphor. So we can judge whether an apple is a good apple because a good apple has utility. We can cut an apple open and generally tell whether it's fit to be eaten or whether it's rotten or not ripe or spoiled. The utility of art, however, is again a subjective trait. An object has utility as art only if the viewer perceives it as such. I think your method of analyzing both of these questions fails because you try to apply an ethical standard of subjectivism versus objectivism to a type of object which can be no more ethical than that which it represents in the real world. For example, a painting of an apple cannot objectively be ethical or unethical, at least within the generally accepted set of ethics, because an apple itself cannot be ethical or unethical. They're both non-ethical objects. Non-ethical meaning they do not have ethics. A painting of a murder, on the other hand, can subjectively be ethical, unethical, or non-ethical depending on the viewer. So the only way which we can even attempt to decide what is good art from an objective point of view is to determine the intent of the artist and its creation. If the intent was to illustrate a banana, but the painting clearly illustrates an apple, then it's bad art, but only from an objectivist standpoint. Some people who look at a painting of an apple that is supposed to be an apple will think it's bad. And on the contrary, some who look at a painting of a banana that's supposed to be an apple will think it's a good painting. Therefore, we reach the answer to the question, what is good art? And it's the same answer to the questions, what's the best music, what's the tastiest food, or what's the prettiest color? The answer is subjective to one's own opinion. Any attempt to classify art as objectively good or bad would be to arbitrarily impose one's taste on others in an elitist fashion. Therefore, in a Rand objectivist definition, I would submit that good art is that which one perceives as art and which makes one happy, subject only to the self.